I have a theory that I'm the first physicist to have been on a nice committee. I apologise to some of you because this is the 15-minute physics slot, but radioiodine and radiation are involved here. I dare say that some, or perhaps many of you, have had radioiodine. I dare say that you may not have come across anything in the way of physicists when that was happening. And I would also guess that for some of you at least, physics was not your favourite subject at school. Yeah. I'm not used to these talks. I was up at 4 o'clock this morning writing this for the 15th time, I will tell you. That's going for the sympathy vote. So for that reason, I will give you just a little bit of background, and I will do some of where I am coming from, as they say on Dragon's Den. I am, like many people, a member of a lot of committees. My air miles would make Greta Thunberg quite angry. It includes the International Commission of Radiological Protection, Radiation Protection Committees, the British Nuclear Medicine Society, and actually I work in a cancer hospital, so most of my work is with the treatment of cancer and diagnosis of cancer, but with radioactive iodine amongst other radiotherapeutics. So I'm very much coming at this from that angle, not as an endocrinologist and not as a thyroid specialist. The reason I'm saying this is because a lot of the issues that we are coming across here, and I will try to cover briefly today, are actually the case right throughout all of these treatments. And in the last few years, this is an area that has taken off. It is now a multi-billion-dollar euro industry. So radioiodine for thyroid cancer you will be aware of. There are all the same questions there, a lot of research questions, and we're running a couple of trials there now, and I'm waiting for feedback from the CR UK, where we've asked for $750,000. We do radioiodine meta-iodobenzyl guanidine. We came up with a way to treat children that have got neuroblastoma. And just to say that this is also radioiodine, we give 3, 4, 5 times as much radioactivity to children as is given for benign thyroids. So it's something we've done a huge amount of work in, as you can imagine. Radium-223 for bone metastases, yttrium-90, and so on. So that's just to sort of let you see kind of my angle. I'm approaching this kind of 10 remaining minutes from 2 angles, and I'm going to try and just explain something of the radiation. Those of you that have got physics training or that understand it, you know, forgive me, but I'm very aware when I talk to patients that they don't really get radiation and they're scared to death of it very often, and I encounter this quite a lot. So I'm just going to focus on that, and I just got a couple of slides at the end for kind of where we might go to. So one of the subjects that we debated a lot on the committee was how to use radiation. Radiation is not some strange otherworldly form, it's just another form of energy, and like everything, if you use it well, it's good, and if you use it badly, it's not. And the same could be said probably for computer games. So 2 research questions that came out after a lot of discussions were what is the long-term clinical and cost effectiveness, including safety, of radioiodine? And what is the clinical and cost effectiveness of dosimetry guided radioiodine strategies for hyperthyroidism? So I'm going to just try and explain what that means, because many people will not know. I'm afraid there's 1 page of physics, you have to put up with it. Scientists, unfortunately, despite what some people may think, don't understand things any better than anybody else does, and we don't explain things. We are not, that's for religion or philosophy perhaps. We just measure things, and we describe what we measure, and we make predictions based on our measurements. So I'm going to teach you, for those who don't know, just 3 things, 3 units of measurement that you need to know. And this is like, you know, distance is measured in kilometers, and pounds measures money, or is it euros? So the 3 things you need to know is like how much radioactivity is there. You know, you're going to have been told this if you've had radioiodine, but probably very few of you actually understood what that meant. So the amount of radiation that you have is measured in becquerels, and a becquerel is 1 radioactive decay per second. So if I've got a lump of radioactivity and I have 1,000,000 radioactive decays per second, I've got 1 megabecquerel, okay? Typical treatments for radioiodine are somewhere between 2 up to 8, depending on what part of the world you're in. If you take that energy and you dump it into some tissue, like the thyroid, you get the energy dumped, and that's the dose, the radiation dose. We have a lot of confusion because if you just use the word dose, and we had this on the committee, are you talking about the dose of rate that you're giving or the dose that you're depositing? So to be clear, we don't use the word dose alone. So the radiation dose is 1 joule of energy in 1 kilogram, and a joule of energy is about the amount of effort it takes to lift a potato off the table. And then the other idea is very much like the dose, but it takes into account the type of radiation and radiation sensitivities of different organs. And that is a concept that's been brought up to talk about radiation doses at low levels of radiation and the potential effect on human health. And that's measured in sieverts. And you'll hear people talk about sieverts or millisieverts. Probably most people here do know that the half-life is the time that it takes for half of the activity to decay. So the big debate with this treatment and with all of the other treatments that I'm talking about, that I referred to earlier, is do we treat according to the megabecquerel, the amount of radiation that I have dangerously holding in my hands here at the moment, or do we talk in terms of the amount of radiation dose that is delivered to the thyroid? And the thing is, people are different. Even scientists have recognised that. If we all have a pint of beer after this, that was a hint, we could both have a pint of lager, but it would have a different effect on us. The biokinetics are different. A different amount will go to the brain. We will respond differently. So if we decide to both go out and get drunk, not a hint, then I might need half a pint of lager because I'm really quite good, but one of you might need 15 pints of Guinness or something, yeah? So do we treat according to the megabecquerel, or do we treat according to the Gray? Now, traditionally, it's always been the megabecquerel, and that's the same throughout medicine, but it's changing for cancer treatments. And this is kind of the fixed versus the calculated. The fixed strategy is everyone gets 600 megabecquerels, or whatever the number is. The calculated strategy is everyone gets whatever radiation is necessary to deliver the same radiation dose to the thyroid. I'm putting this in because I'm quite a strong advocate of this. And it isn't something that can happen overnight, but this was based on, to be honest, when I started my job, a lot of this work had been done, so this isn't my work. I came along 10 years later and did the analysis because people kept going on about it, so I put some of my team onto it. And they did a study back in the 80s, when there was a lot more of the dosimetry going on, of 300 patients that all got 60 Gray. The mean activity was 100 megabecquerels, but there was a huge range of activity to deliver this 60 Gray. So we did analysis after 10 years, found that 50% of the patients were undertreated and needed more radioiodine, but then we found 20% of the patients actually became hypothyroid, and 10 years later, 30% of the patients are naturally euthyroid without any need for thyroid replacement. And just that one study kind of, as a physicist, just calls up, all right, there's something here to explore. Some patients need more, some patients need less. In cancer treatment, there's a huge push towards personalisation of treatment. Sorry, you don't have to have the physics slide again. I just want to do some slides to talk about risks of radiation, okay? Because there's a lot of stuff talked about this. It's a huge fight going on even at the moment among the physicists around the planet. There are people that are fundamentally kind of like fighting each other. I will tell you now, we don't know, all right? And here's why. And I think it's easier to actually explain where this is coming from rather than just to state the fact. I'm not going to say to you, don't worry about it. I'm not going to say, yes, there's a big risk. And this is why. If you plot the effect of radiation from the radiation dose that is delivered, almost all the data and the information we have from that comes from the atomic bombs that were dropped in Japan in the 1940s. Now, even taking away the fact that maybe radioiodine is not quite like an atomic bomb, it does kind of, the bigger question with that is those radiation doses were quite high. So all the data that we have, and this was from following the survivors from the bomb for decades and finding out whereabouts they were stood, what radiation dose they got, they're all quite high doses, okay? The doses that we're talking about are down here, right? There are no studies. So what do? Well, what the world has done is to say, well, let's just take what we do know and just trace that line back to the beginning, okay? And, you know, it's a fairly reasonable approach. It's simple, anybody can do it. This is the universally accepted model. It's called the linear no threshold model. What it says is that even a little bit of radiation is dangerous, or it can have, you know, can cause a cancer later in life. And the principle behind it is ALARA, which means that radiation exposures should be kept as low as reasonably achievable. Now, there's a huge fight going on here because some people will say, well, actually, this is nonsense. The human race has evolved with a lot of background radiation. You know, we're bombarded by cosmic rays every day. It's not just tracing it back. Really, at low levels of radiation, there's hardly any effect at all. You know, we're good at that. Don't, you know, kind of say that what happens in radioiodine is extrapolated from the bombs. The hardliners of these talk about a hard threshold. They say below some threshold of radiation, there is no danger whatsoever. Now, at the same time, there are a lot of cellular experiments that say, actually, a little bit of radiation is a lot more dangerous than you would think. We're killing a lot more cells than we would expect using those models. Right? And they're valid experiments. And then finally, we're not finished, there is a thing called hormesis. And in some parts of Europe, you can pay to sit in a radioactive mine and read a newspaper while you are irradiated. The argument being that radiation will only kill off the cells that are already damaged and might become cancerous. Right? So this is where we are, right? We don't have magic answers, we don't have the studies. This is where we are. This is why everybody is fighting. Generally speaking, using the risk of radiation model, the linear model, it is accepted that there is a risk of about 5.5% chance of getting a cancer from one sievert. The radiation dose delivered from radioiodine therapy is somewhere between 0.01 to 0.1 thousandths of a sievert per megabecquerel. So for a 400 megabec administration, if you do the sums, you can have a risk of cancer from somewhere between 1 in many hundreds to 1 in many thousands. Right? This is all theoretical. It's fine. You know, I can do this because I've been trained. And you can sit and do the numbers. But these risks vary according to the model that you use. They vary according to how old you are. Younger people are more radiation sensitive. They vary according to the rate at which the dose is delivered. Some people are more radiosensitive than others. And we have to bear in mind that somewhere between 10% and 90% of the radiation is actually going to the thyroid and doing what it's supposed to do. So really, a lot of the body is not getting that radiation. So the bottom line of all of that, we don't know the risks, all right? It's not that, so if somebody says it's definitely a risk or it's definitely no risk, you know, they're doing the best they can, but we don't really know. If the risks were definitely huge, we would know. You know, there's no way with this number of patients treated that we wouldn't know if there was a definite big risk. It doesn't mean that not every single patient is not at risk. I would say as conclusively as I can, as a physicist, there is no risk to pets and friends and family. Okay? They get only the smallest fraction. I'm often asked about the danger to their pets and their family, usually in that order, it has to be said. I have received a much greater radiation dose than your... Actually, the worst one was a parrot. We said, animals don't live long enough to get cancer. And the woman said, I've got a parrot. And you have to think of all risks in relation. There is a risk from eating one banana. Bananas are radioactive. There is theoretically a risk of 1 in 200 million of getting cancer. There are radiation risks from potatoes. Brazil nuts are positively glowing in the dark. Yeah? There's a risk from yourself. Each of us is radioactive. You have a 1 in 500,000 chance, theoretically, of getting a cancer from sleeping next to somebody for a year. So if you want an excuse to go to the spare room, okay? There's a chance of getting cancer from being hyperthyroid. There's a chance of cancer from obesity, lack of fibre, too little exercise, going outdoors too much, staying indoors too much, and so it goes. So I'm not saying there isn't a risk at all, but I am saying the fear of radiation that has been instilled in us because of the bombs, because of the Incredible Hulk, because of the 4-minute warning, we're trying very hard to counter that. There are some sheets at the back that we wrote with the BTF. So very briefly, to sort of head towards winding up, because I'm sure that I'm going to get some signs soon from Sarah, and she's a good chair, but scary. What is the evidence? You hear the word evidence a lot. We all use the evidence. I mean, you know, I've done, I don't know how many studies in my career trying to find evidence. And the sad truth is that most of the evidence I find is ignored because it's not that good. All right, so the study that I showed earlier, NICE didn't reckon that was good enough because it wasn't a randomized controlled trial. That's fair. You know, we've all done it. This is what we do. Lies, damned lies, and statistics. The thing that is amazing to me, is that there are 10,000 treatments a year in the UK. Maybe that will double with the new NICE guidelines. Given that we're 1% of the world's population, that might mean 1 million treatments a year. And we've been doing this since 1941. Okay? And we're still asking these questions. And NICE found only 6 randomized controlled trials that had actually looked at whether we treat according to megabecquerel or Gray. So just 2 slides. NICE recommended, because of this lack of evidence of how best to use radioiodine, that a clinical trial is necessary to address the issue of the level of activity to administer and the role of dosimetry and the effect on the patient quality of life. If it makes no difference being naturally euthyroid or having thyroid supplements, then it's not an issue. If it makes no difference having more radiation than is needed, it's not an issue. But we have these days got amazingly good technology and methodology that's all being developed for cancer treatments. It is envisaged that a multidisciplinary working party will be formed, including endocrinologists, nuke med, physicists, oncologists, primary care and patients, to develop a robust trial. It's been said for quite a long time that there's no way you can answer these questions. It would take thousands, tens of thousands of patients possibly, and a very long follow-up. I would suggest that actually now we can do this for the first time. What we've got here is amazing, and I think, you know, I love this here. I can say there is nothing like this meeting that I come across in any of the cancer treatments that I do. And we have got 20,000 patients a year, so maybe we can think big. We're the first country to have national guidelines. Nobody has done that anywhere else. So this is visionary. We would need a huge study. It would take a large workup, take a huge amount of collaboration, multidisciplinary efforts, paid translators to convert one discipline's ideas into another discipline's. Patients and GPs should be equal investigators. We're including patients all the time now in our clinical trials as investigators. The physics interest, from my side, is to apply the methods that we've developed for the cancer treatments to personalise these treatments and to develop individualised risk estimates. I think that we could do that. But a large trial could also address all of the other questions that are coming up today and that everybody has. I think the saddest thing of all would be if this same meeting is repeated in 20 years' time with the same questions. You know, we're much better than that. There's an awful lot of power in this room. So if anybody would be vaguely interested in doing a UK programme grant, and I'm not saying that I might do it, but I have already talked to the NIHR. And there is even a case officer. That's it. Thank yous. I have an amazing physics team that do all the work while I go around talking about it. I'd sincerely like to thank the NICE committee. It's one of the nicest committees that I've been on, pun. The power and the value of a multidisciplinary committee cannot be underestimated. And yeah, we had a lot of robust and very healthy discussions, but that's where progress comes from. You know, anybody can sit with their own group and agree about how terrible the rest of the world is. And I would like to thank all of you for coming here today on a Saturday. Thank you.